Greetings comrades, Jotsko here, and welcome back to Beating the Machine, the video series that shows truly how lost and lonely I am in the depths of the subnet, which serves as the overarching setting for the point-and-click room escape game series by developer Mateusz Skutnik. In this video, I want to make some quick descriptions and arguments about not the subnet as a whole, which will be the topic of a much later episode, but instead one aspect in particular. Recently, at the time of making this video, I have had several important discussions with fellow subnet explorers like yourself, trying to wrap our heads around one of the most mysterious environments found in the Submachine series, the loop. Now, the loop has various definitions in the series, including A series of rooms that repeat infinitely or randomly when traversed by the player, typically contained inside a single coordinate location. B, a series of locations that are connected by one-way karma portals, so instead of switching back and forth between two locations, you can instead visit an entire chain of locations before looping back to the original starting location. Visit an entire chain of locations. Visit an entire before looping back to the original starting location. C, a mysterious, seemingly otherworldly alternate dimension that contains infinite arrays of rooms spread across seemingly infinite layers and sublayers. Or D, the name of the third game in the main series. While all of these definitions are definitely worthy of discussion, in this video we will be focusing on definition C, and we will be revisiting Submachine 3 The Loop in order to do so. This game, when compared with the rest of the games in the main series, is generally treated as a bit of an outlier. It does not follow the typical structure of what we usually think of when we think of what makes a submachine game a submachine game. Rather than taking place in certain locations and forcing the player to collect items to make it through the game, this game strictly involves puzzles and not much else, and it takes place in the strangest quote-unquote location ever known. How exactly does one characterize the loop? Is it a place or is it not? How does it fit into the space that we know as the subnet? A good place to start answering this question is to take a look at the in-game notes that can be found spread across Submachine 3 itself, as well as Submachine 8, which acts as a complement to Submachine 3. For more information on complementary games on the Submachine series and games that mirror each other, I invite you to check out episode 3 of BTM, A World of Mirrors, link in the description. But anyway, back to the notes. I've compiled a large list full of both notes from Sub 3 and Sub 8, as well as a couple of other games, and also forum posts made throughout the years made by developer Mateusz Skutnik himself. Let's take a look at them, one at a time. First, considering how we got into the loop in the first place. Quote, yeah, it was one of the first portals created by Mir. It was unstable. Where did he want us to go through this? The lab? Did this instability help the sub to mismatch our path and dump us into the loop? Quoted from Mateusz himself. It seems that the instability of the karma portal in the lighthouse tower failed to lead us directly to the lab and instead redirected us to the loop. However, since we are able to eventually get back on track and use the green leaf at the end to connect us back to the lab in Sub 4, it seems that the loop might be a detour of sorts, or as Mateusz himself describes it, I always thought that the loop in Submachine 3 was some sort of passage, just a path, a road to something or somewhere. And this makes sense if you consider the fact that this all happened because we entered a karma portal, which is a mode of transition between locations. This is also partially reinforced by the note from Sub 8, which states, see, this knot is just like the loop. Well, maybe not exactly, but it serves the same purpose. And the only reason Sub 8 happened is we entered a very large unstable portal that dropped us into a realm where we could change layers while traveling between locations. Again, hinting at the connection to physical travel. So I believe it's safe to say that it's well established that the loop can be seen as the inner workings of the modes of transit used to access different locations in the subnet. But of course, it is much more than that. We need to figure out why the loop is filled with infinite planes of infinite rooms, confirmed by both Mateusz himself in a single-word forum post answering the question of how many rooms were in each plane, as well as in this secret note from Submachine 3. Never stroll away from the center. Never. I had a companion once. She said she wanted to check how far do these rooms go. I've never seen her again. The picture is now starting to build itself a little better. The loop is a mysterious place that can be accessed mid-transit between locations. But obviously something isn't quite right to this picture. The loop feels wrong and out of place in comparison to everything else we know about the subnet, and more notes and forum posts that we run across in our travels only make the questions more prominent. Quote, well, that is the big question now. So is it a computer loop? A dysfunctional sector of the Matrix? I doubt that. That looks like another dimension to me. These are words from the beginning of a forum post by Mateusz Skutnik. He uses the word dimension, which is a word we have to be extremely careful with when regarding the Submachine series, because it is used both to describe typical both physical dimensions, such as length, width, and height, but it can also be used interchangeably with the word layer. And sometimes it's also used to describe just a completely different reality separate of what we know. What I believe is meant here is that the loop is not part of the subnet that we know, at least not directly. It is not a contained location like the sanctuary, the pyramid, or the lighthouse. And we must also consider this critical note, which states in sub 3, the loop is timeless, spaceless, without beginning or end. And this is one of the most confusing notes regarding the loop that I could find, and most of the discussion I've had with fellow explorers has centered on this sentence. It makes sense, and yet it doesn't. As we go through puzzle after puzzle in Submachine 3, everything sort of feels the same, so time doesn't really seem to pass. And the definition of space loses all meaning when we realize that each puzzle takes place in an infinite grid. Yet these words still do hold meaning because we are able to traverse physical space as we move from room to room, and if we choose the bad ending in sub 3, the player can actually die of dehydration, which can only happen if the player goes without water for about 3 days, and that takes time. So how to reconcile these discrepancies? My personal belief is this: when the loop is described as timeless and spaceless without beginning or end, it is meant in relation to the rest of the subnet. The loop operates on its own timescale that is measured differently than that of the rest of the subnet, and there's no beginning nor end because the scales meant to compare the loop and the subnet just don't compare at all. Think about it. Karma portal transportation is supposed to be instantaneous, so it takes no time at all. We don't typically experience any feelings of flying through space while using the portals, yet we experience the passage of time and space in the loop in sub 3, so that instant must have been stretched out or dilated in a sense, which means that the concept of time and space change as well. And this thought is actually supported by Mateus himself in his forum post. Quote, ask another question. Why is it described as timeless and spaceless? The measurement of time attached to our planet can be altered or seen differently somewhere else, which as far as I'm concerned pretty much confirms that you have to consider different standards of time and space between the loop and the subnet. If you're having a hard time visualizing what I mean by all of this regarding shifts in time and space, I have an analogy. In the 1997 movie Contact, Jodie Foster plays a woman named Ellie who enters a machine that transports her through space and time via a wormhole to a different reality, and she flies through space and time and journeys to a distant planet for a total of 18 hours. However, when returning to Earth, an infinitely small amount of time has actually passed. She is exactly where she was in the machine when she left Earth, so no time has actually passed on Earth, but she gained 18 more hours in that impossibly tiny amount of Earth time. The loop is quite like Ellie's journey. It takes a simple instantaneous journey through a portal and stretches it for a certain length of time before returning back to the subnet, and during that whole process, no time has passed in the subnet at all. This idea has some very interesting implications. Let's say it takes you a day to go through subs 1 and 2, so by the time you enter the lighthouse portal to begin Submachine 3, you have 2 days left to find water, and if you choose the bad ending in sub 3 and continue to solve puzzles forever until you die, you will use up both days and die of dehydration. Now let's say someone managed to bust your dead body out of the loop and drop it onto the rooftop of the lab. To an observer who did not enter the loop but watched your journey from the safety of the subnet, and I use the word safety lightly, rest in peace exploration teams, they would have seen the entire thing happen in just 1 day. They would have seen you transport from the lighthouse alive and well and immediately end up dead at the lab, maybe drawing the conclusion that the lighthouse portal is actually a vicious, instant, killing machine. If you were able to follow that explanation, that helps to describe the nature of the loop in respect to time. But what about space? It's pretty clear that the loop isn't truly spaceless, judging by the fact that we can move from room to room in any given level, and the compass we pick up at the beginning tracks our movements. So like we said before, we must be operating on a different scale of space that appears spaceless to an observer in the subnet. And the reasoning is quite the same as with time. Just as we were able to manipulate time out of seemingly nothing, we can do the same with space. Instantaneous transportation with karma portals has always seemed like it doesn't really care about space, and if we continue with the wormhole analogy from the movie Contact as before, it seems even more plausible. For clarification, wormholes are theoretical devices that exist in space that do the equivalent of bringing two regions of space together to traverse large distances in no time and space at all. This brief scene from the movie Interstellar explains it well. Since there is meant to be no space between opposite ends of a karma portal, the loop therefore must be a different version of space. This plays into the part of one of Mateus's posts that says, "That looks like another dimension to me." And it also gives credit to this short note in Submachine 7. If the subnet is the universe, then the loops are black holes. And if loops are black holes, then they cannot possibly be true locations of space in the subnet. A location is like a ball in a room. You can point to it and say where it is, because you can measure it with respect to the room, maybe in terms of X, Y, and Z, or something else. However, loops and black holes don't follow this logic. When you approach a black hole, time and space warp, which means you can't use the same standards of the room to pinpoint the exact location, because the measurement changes drastically the closer you get. The scale is not consistent anymore, and for that reason the loop is, in respect to the rest of the subnet, quite literally timeless and spaceless. It simply cannot be compared. Now, this is not to say that the loop is completely separate of the subnet altogether, however. One of the most interesting pieces of evidence for this is that the rooms in Sub 3 all are modeled off of the architecture of the lighthouse tower, with similar doorways, ladders, and lights, which just happens to be where we found the first portal in the first place. And actually, for the longest time, I thought this was just a coincidence, but didn't really look into it. But now it makes so much more sense. In a way, in Sub 3, we never truly left the lighthouse. I mean, we did because we're in the loop, but also not at the same time. Kinda stressful to wrap my mind around. But it would make sense. This entire time in Sub 3 we've been looping around and around, right at the beginning of our Karma Portal journey, barely even leaving the lighthouse. Which makes me wonder, what would happen if a similar unstable loop occurred at a different location or submachine? The lab, for example. Would we be able to enter an infinite loop of rooms that are modeled after lab rooms? Or pyramid rooms with candles and strange symbols in every single screen? The thought, frankly, boggles my mind. At this point, we've approximately figured out the true form of the loop, which is a mysterious sort of anti-dimension of sorts to the subnet, which relies on its own timeline in space, akin to how wormholes and black holes bend universal spacetime. It really does a lot to confirm the loop as the true anomaly we all have grown to regard it as for several years. But is it really an anomaly? Can we really say that without knowing the true purpose of the loop? Why does it exist, and how is it deeper connected to the subnet as a whole? Is it the secret hidden bare-bones structure of the subnet as we know it, or is it a counterforce to the stable locations and solid unmoving structures of the subnet itself? Does it have anything to do with karma or computers? Is it built of strands of pure energy or lines of code? These questions will be left for another video. Hopefully this video wasn't too confusing for you to watch. Dealing with these type of extreme anomalies is never the easiest meal to digest, but I feel like I did my best, or at least tried. I felt it necessary to explain my thoughts on how exactly to picture the loop due to the uptick of conversation about it in the Submachine community at the time of making this video, and hopefully this video either did you some good or propelled you to further discuss the loop and other Submachine aspects with your colleagues and friends. Or both. Plus, I have a special spot in my heart for the loop. I'm attracted to its unrelenting, unforgiving mystery, how it seems to easily break all of the rules that we know about the subnet. Plus, it has one of the best soundtracks in the entire series, in my subjective opinion. It's cold and makes you uncomfortable. It lets you know that you as a player are not welcome in its bounds, which is pretty characteristic of the loop itself. The loop is not an environment to be taken lightly, as the consequences can prove quite fatal indeed. And on that happy note, this is Jatsuko signing off and hoping to see you again sometime down the road. Bye-bye.